Hello, Patriots. I'm Tim Gagnon. Welcome to the Patriot Arts Podcast. I want you to imagine yourself as an 18-year-old Army private traveling on Air Force One with the President. Well, that's exactly what today's guest, John Cosby, did. And it was on those missions abroad that John saw first-hand original art by the great masters. Art that inspires him to this day. Now, since his separation from active duty, John has enjoyed an absolutely storied career as an American Impressionist painter. He's a founding member of the Plein Air Painters of America, the California Art Club, and the Plein Air Invitational. His bold contemporary style can be found in private, public, and corporate collections around the world. So Patriots, let's give a warm welcome to today's guest, John Cosby. So welcome to the show, John. We really appreciate you coming on. I am just absolutely ecstatic for you. I've got a plein air painter in front of me, which is one of my little secret hobbies that I like to do with my art. So I'm very excited to talk to you. How old were you when you joined the military? What branch were you in? Tell us a little bit about your entering into the military life.
Yeah, my military life. I moved out of home at 17 and a half. I left high school because I couldn't take one more minute of it. While in basic training, because of the qualifications that they needed, I got a lot of special offers. So I was signals eventually. I'd originally planned on being a doctor. I was going to go to college, and my grades were at the point where I could qualify for a few colleges. But while about 2.5, 3 weeks into basic training, groups of men start coming and pulling me out of training to talk to me in groups of other guys, and offered special circumstances, Washington, D.C. based, mostly NSA and CIA executive branch type jobs. And I basically found out that I could travel the world in one of them. They wouldn't tell me what the job was going to be because it was top secret, but they said you'll get to travel the world about 200-300 days out of the year. And I thought, wow, that'd be fun. That's kind of why I want to be in the military. So I said, do I get a gun? And they said, probably, but not your regular military service. Anyway, I ended up going through signals training in Georgia at Fort Gordon, and still didn't know what the job was, but I met one other person who was on the same track, and one of the two of us was going for the Army to the White House that year, but neither one of us knew that's where we were going. And so I arrived in a war zone, so to speak, but it was the Watergate situation with Nixon.
Oh, gosh. Surprise.
I was the Army person being sent to an agency called WACA, which has got one person from each service each year. And they usually stay a long time. But it was right in the beginning of Watergate. The controversy had just broken. And so I went through both the Ford and Nixon administrations as an advance man for secret, anything high-end communications, from the red phone to, we handled everything. We handled everything that was not public, military,
Gotcha.
Secret Service, everything.
Sure.
Wow, look at these clouds. There's nothing like painting clouds, and I'm talking to you today from Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I can turn in a complete circle and see clouds all around me. So this is an opportunity I don't want to miss, and neither should you. So a couple things to remember. The clouds have soft edges, so here you want to use a lot of water. Here I'm going to paint the blue part of the sky that we can see here, right in here, and I'm leaving some ragged edges there. But mostly I want nice soft edges. So here I'm using more water. I'm covering the area that I want. with water to keep those nice soft edges. And then I'm mixing, you see the darker color of the underside of the clouds. There I'm mixing a little brown into that blue. And I'm using a big brush so I can go quickly. And here is that underside of that cloud there. So they're really quick, a little bit like that, and you're done. Don't overdo it. So get out there and paint that landscape, especially those marvelous clouds. And that's your quick tip.
Getting your drawings to look more realistic and less like a drawing is actually a lot easier than you might first think. It's all about the lines, or rather, the lack of line. The form of an object should be established with value or shading, not with lines. The best way to do this is to draw very lightly in the beginning stages so that your shading will hide your line work. And that's your tip of the day. Let's get drawing. Well, that must have been so you saw all kinds of things. I mean, you got to be in the White House, you got to see all kinds of things. So what was it like being a young man? I mean, you were what? How old were you?
I was 18. Yeah.
18 years old in the White House, watching presidents walk by and all these things happening. That must have been quite the experience.
It was. It's hard to even explain because I had no perspective at the time, so I can only look back on it with perspective. And I didn't know what a Democrat and a Republican was, and that's exactly what they wanted. They wanted somebody who would serve and not ask questions, just do what you were told.
Right.
And have enough technical expertise. I was a team manager for a technical team so I didn't manage them in the books. I managed their movements when we set up motorcade routes and switchboards in hospitals, and we supported the Secret Service and the president and executive branch all the way down to Kissinger at the time, the Secretary of State. And so I traveled with those people a lot on Air Force One or on a plane that was going ahead or following back ahead of them. Wow. So I got to meet everybody from Anwar Sadat to literally everybody. I did several of the summits, Helsinki summit, and I went to Vladivostok and to the whole Pacific Rim. So we had a pretty intense job. You were on the job 24 hours a day. When I was at the White House, I got to draw cartoons for a little Navy newspaper we have at the White House that is basically the White House newsletter. And the Navy has a press down in the basement, and I got to put a couple of cartoons in there, and so got recognized as the guy who could draw a cartoon. And so I had private people come to me, staffers or even a couple times military people that were in charge of me and say, hey, my grandson's getting this. I'd like you to draw a cartoon of this for me. So that was my very first recognition that I could do something that people would want. So that got me going thinking wise, but of course there was no money involved. It was just gratitude more than anything else. And when I left the White House, I needed to decompress a little bit. I was there 4 years through, a little bit of a tumultuous time, more than we're even having now in a way, because there were full-blown war between the branches. And I went, when Nixon resigned, I went to San Clemente with him for the transition period. So I was there with Ron Ziegler and Diane Sawyer and all the press corps and the Secret Service, and I showed him movies. So I was often present when things were happening. And then we answered the phones. So in realizing all that pressure, I guess you'd say, to do everything perfect, when I went with Ford, I started traveling the world a lot more because we weren't in battle. And I started seeing paintings that, like in Ceausescu's Romania, I woke up one morning in a bedroom in their castle up in the Transylvanian Alps that we'd gone up to put the equipment in. And there was original Van Goghs and Picassos on the wall. And it was the first time I'd actually seen things like that. I'd been in museums, but it's different when it's in a house.
Yeah, I bet.
So I got exposed, and I thought, wow, this is really something that I would be interested in someday knowing more about. So when I was on a boat cruising, after I left the White House, I was decompressing, that's what that story was about. And I started sailing the intercoastal on a boat that I traded a motorcycle for, so it wasn't much of a boat, but it was enough to stay floating most of the time. And I would sit in harbor and draw other people's boats because I was interested in boating. I thought, wow, a boats be fun to draw. And people on other boats would look over at me and say, hey, what are you doing? And I'd say, I'm drawing your boat. Can I see? So that, they row over and trade me dinner for the drawing, or maybe a halyard or a hurricane lamp or something that I needed. And I really had a bargaining chip here.
There you go.
So that was the beginning of my remuneration for my art, really.
I'm Mary White, and if you're a veteran interested in telling your story through art, come join us at the Patriot Art Foundation, where we will help give you a means of purpose, connection, and expression through art. So come join us today.
Charcoal or graphite? What should you draw with? Charcoal naturally wants to draw darker, creating a velvety matte black. The downside is that it's more difficult to achieve lighter values. Graphite is the opposite, lending itself to drawing lighter. Because of its crystalline nature, graphite has a metallic sheen to it, which makes it difficult to achieve a true black. Graphite pencils come in a wide variety of levels, and as this chart shows, range from very light to very dark. Charcoal is generally sold in a 3-pack of soft, medium, and hard pencils, which are actually charcoal mixed with clay and compressed to make very dark marks. To achieve softer values, vine or willow charcoal is simply burnt wood. These are very fragile and make light marks that are easily wiped off. So whether it's graphite, whether it's charcoal, it doesn't matter. Drawing is just so much fun. Speaking of which, if you've got some drawings that you'd like to share with us at the Patriot Art Foundation, be sure to send us some pictures of your artwork by sending it to our website or on our social media. Let's take a look at some of this artwork. Let's start with this one, this beautiful painting of boats, which is how you started your career. Look at that. Oh, that's so nice. Look at that. Talk to us about it.
Well, this painting kind of represents what I built my career on in a lot of ways. I painted harbors all around the country, even all around the world, in Europe also. Because my love of boats, I understand them. I was a sailor for many years. My dad built boats in our backyard my whole childhood, or my later childhood. And all these harbors just they resonate with me. So once I figured out my skills and brought them up to a level where I could actually pull off a loose looking image that had reality base, I was kind of free to travel the world and paint these kinds of paintings, and people were supporting me in that. Boat lovers, for one thing, but also people that just like harbors and like beautiful places. So I was one of the rare painters. You don't see a lot of them who paint a impressionistic style of boat painting. Usually they're very rigid. You look at they're historically correct. Every cleat is in place. Every halyard is in the right, it's tied in the right spot. And I don't bother with any of that. I know the rigging, so I put it where it should go, but I'm not overly concerned with it. So it's been a popular, I do a lot of boat type commissions also. People say, I just finished one, in fact, for somebody to put in their new boat they just had built. So
that's really cool. It's one of the things, when you're an artist and you're trying to start a career, you have to find your audience. You have to find who's your ideal customer and where will you find them in a good mood, willing to buy. Well, the way you started it by just sitting in a boat, drawing their boat, they're going, hey, what you doing looking at my boat so much?
Oh, it's a direct connection.
All of a sudden they're like, wow, you painted my boat. And not only that, people that have a boat like that, in a harbor like that, they can afford your painting.
Oh, yes.
And so you are just right there with your ideal customer at the perfect time. They're going to be in a great mood by seeing you paint their boat. I mean, that's just like a perfect way to sell. I mean, it's just like you might as well be at an art festival. It
was very organic. Even better because you're literally painting their dog, their boat.
Right. That's the thing. That's their baby, their life, their passion, and you're painting it. So That is a great, there's some business tips for y'all. If you're watching, that's some great stuff.
Yeah.
There you go.
4,000 boat painters out there next week.
That's right. Well, let's take a look at this next one. This is a beautiful landscape. There is nothing like this part of America to paint.
Yeah. I just got back from, after painting this painting and a tour through the Southwest that I did painting it, I have a van that I live out of when I'm on the road for about 2 weeks out of every month. And so I travel pretty consistently now. It's my land yacht, basically. Nice. And this is up in Dead Man's Point, I think it's called, near Moab in Utah. And I was really interested in the patterns, the way the patterns worked in shadow and the different colored light patterns in the soils. And so I was exploring this entire trip that I was on. And very recently, last October, I rented a house in Zion, just outside of Zion in a little town called Rockville, and for 2.5 months. And I was riding my bike during the day, my mountain bike, through this stuff. And then I would observe it closely. And then morning and evening, I would do a painting of everything that I saw or found on the ride. So I find it, again, a very organic way to travel and experience what I'm going to paint, get really interested in it because I see a lot of beautiful things like this view and try to capture it. I was very interested in creating air in a really dry climate because dry climates don't really show up a lot of distance. They have dark shadows in the background. And so I was learning how to push and pull shadows and darker and lighter shadows to make them work against each other. If you notice that really light shadow behind the point up there, the mesa top, that wasn't nearly that light, but I learned if I didn't push it there, it wouldn't show up the same. So my love of travel is really what got me painting because I didn't want to give up my Washington days travel. So I started traveling around the country and painting things. Well, plein air, I'd never heard the word before, but I was named that well into my career because I painted outside in plein air. And I've never stopped because I can get the truth when I'm out there. I can actually look at something, see it correctly. And I just constantly am trying to build my skills to the next level so that I can actually paint what I see rather than what I imagine it should be.
That's a great point. Plein air painting, for me, plein air painting that's where, my studio work is tight, but when I go out plein air painting, it's like I can finally relax and just have fun. To me, there's nothing like plein air painting, and so I got my little watercolor book, and I paint it with gouache when I watercolor paint. And that it's just a little easier than oil paints. I can get out there, I can paint my little thing, close the book, walk my way out. Don't have to worry about like getting this special thing to protect the oil paint. I just close the book and go. And it's just so much fun. There's something about plein air painting that is unlike any other thing that you can do artistically. You're getting out there in the wild beyond and just plein air. You're out there in the plein air, just, fresh air, breathing in it. You're there with it, and there's something about that that's very primal that I just absolutely love. So, and you are absolutely a master at that. Let's take a look at this next one. This one's kind of funny. It reminds me of the dunes on the beach, and a lot of plein air painters do beach dunes where I live. This one kind of reminds me of that. It's just really, really beautiful painting. Take a look at this. Oh, my goodness. Look at the atmospheric perspective in this. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Well, this is a fairly large painting. It's a 30 by 40, I believe. Oh, no, it's a 36-48 maybe. But I worked on it plein air. After I started the painting, I designed it because of the odd angle that I was working on. I designed it in the studio so that I could really stand back and think of the ways that I wanted to work it. And then I took it outside so I could get the correct colorization and aerial perspective, as you brought up. And I have a rig that'll hold a painting that big, even outdoors. But basically, this is the California wash type thing that I grew up in, with a BB gun and some hiking boots every day after school, walking around and looking for lizards or birds to shoot at. And so when I see these things, they just remind me of my childhood. They make me want to paint them. And I don't see these things painted very often, inland California pieces like this, but they really resonate with me. So I just go ahead and throw myself out there and paint things that I love. And sometimes people really respond to them and sometimes they don't. If they don't, I've got a painting I really like, I can hang in my house. And then what's amazing is 2 or 3 years later, people start responding to that type of painting. So I don't really paint for success in sales. I really paint for success of the art. And over time, I've been doing this 40 years now. Over time, I find that the audience finds me and finds the painting. And in the meantime, I get to travel like I want to. I get to do what I want to for a living, and sometimes sometimes scary kind of living. But I'll tell you, you don't go into art with a plan to make a living. If you do, you're a fool.
That is true. That is true. It's not for the faint of heart. It really
no.
It's not for the faint of heart. I've told my wife that many times. I'm like, you married an artist, baby. I'm sorry, but it's not for the faint of heart. It can get a little wild sometimes. It can get crazy. It can get scary, and but it's a blast. It's one of those things. A lot of my friends they'll call me up and they'll be like, "Oh, Tim, my day, blah 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 blah," and I'm like, "Well, tell me about your day," and they'll vent about their day and their boss and all this, and then they'll say, "I'm sorry. Tell me about your day. I'm being rude. I didn't ask you about your day." And I'm like, "You don't want to know. You don't want to know. You'll just get angry." And they're like, no, you tell me about your day. And I'm like, "I painted a pineapple on a surfboard today." And they're like,
right.
I'm like, "You wanted to be an accountant, pal." It's like,
right.
You got a business degree. I got an art degree. Who had more fun?
I've had many of my clients actually, like I have a client, a big client of mine when I was an illustrator was Taco Bell. And they owned Kentucky Chicken and they owned Pizza Hut at the time. And the big executives there were in their 50s and late 40s, and they were super successful. And they were buying my work, for their golf tournaments. They wanted me to paint them and things like that. And they thought they were so superior with their huge earnings and their stock options and their parking spots right next to the front of the building and all that. And I was just an artist, right? Well, they all retired, and 20 years later, they're doing what they're doing. And more than one of them has come to me and said, "You did it right. You did what you wanted to do for your living. And I did what I did. And the money is no comfort in my older age." And where you got this until you drop dead, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't mean to gloat on that. It's just something that I had no choice but to do this. You know, I didn't really have the drive to be a big corporate executive. And so I ended up being what I am.
Right. I think sometimes artists, you know, we don't choose to be an artist. Art chooses us. You know, it's like we have to create. We have to create. It's in us. It's so ingrained in us to be creative.
Yeah.
You know, but it does take courage to get out there and go for it. You know, it's like anything else. You know, being an entrepreneur takes courage to take the leap. To be an entrepreneur takes courage to take the leap. And you've done that quite successfully now for, you said, over 40 years. Well, this has been a fabulous interview. I have just enjoyed this tremendously. I know that our viewers are going to absolutely have been having a blast listening to it. You've been a fountain of information, and I loved hearing your stories. You are quite the storyteller. And so we're going to have a great time. We will have to have you back on this podcast ASAP, and because you are just a joy to listen to. So thank you very much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me.
And real quick, where can they find you online?
Well, www.cosbystudio.com.
Cosbystudio.com. Great. We'll make sure that we have that link both on the screen now and also in the description below. So again, John, thank you very much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Welcome, veterans, to Watercolor Boot Camp, where we are going to show you how you can tell your own story through art. I'm Mary White. I spent 7 years traveling the country, painting veterans from all walks of life and from every state for the project We the People, Portraits of Veterans in America. And that's where I learned how painting could be a way for you too, as a veteran, to tell your own story. We're going to show you how you can select your painting materials, draw it on the paper, mix the color, paint washes, and create paintings that you'll be proud enough to show your family.
I was a combat medic.
Army.
I hadn't painted in 55 years.
Since the 4th grade. I tried watercoloring once, it didn't work out very well. Not as hard as I thought it was.
And so what will your paintings look like? Well, they won't look like mine, and they won't look like anybody else's, because there's no one way to paint. There's not a right way or a wrong way. Your paintings will look just like your own, because maybe you like to paint every little detail, or maybe you like to paint big, loose washes and paintings that are almost abstract. You might like bright, vibrant color, or you may prefer neutral colors.
I'm learning and watching Mary, how she just throws paint on the canvas and all of a sudden it's a pair of boots. Amazing.
It sounds weird, but you lose track of time. And that's when you know you're doing something that's good for you. You'll be painting and all of a sudden you look around and it's like, man, it's been 2 hours. Oh, this is amazing. This is what I've been doing with my life, painting.
We're gonna come alongside you so that you can work at your own pace in your own home. And we're gonna show you how to paint big, loose paintings, still life, landscapes, flowers, animals, portraits, and even illustrated journals that you'll be proud to have as a keepsake.
It saved me. I hit a really deep spot, and it was the art therapy that it pulled me out. I get stressed, that's the first thing I go to. The problem still exists, but it doesn't affect me anymore.
We are so proud at the Patriot Art Foundation to partner with Terracotta to bring you these courses. And so now, let's get started.